Robert Chen sat in his empty kitchen, staring at the cold cup of coffee that had been sitting there for 2 hours. The morning light streamed through the windows of his suburban home, but it felt gray and lifeless. 6 months had passed since his wife Margaret had lost her battle with cancer, and every day still felt like walking through thick fog. At 52 years old, Robert had thought he had his life figured out. He and Margaret had been married for 25 years. They had planned to travel the world after he retired from his job as an electrical engineer. They had saved money, made lists of places to visit, and dreamed of lazy afternoons in small European cafes. But cancer had stolen all of those dreams away. Now Robert lived alone in their 4-bedroom house. The silence was overwhelming. He had tried to keep busy with work, but even his colleagues noticed his struggle. His sister called every few days, worried about him. His neighbors brought casseroles that he barely touched. Everyone meant well, but nothing filled the emptiness that Margaret had left behind. On this particular Tuesday morning in November, Robert decided to walk to the grocery store instead of driving. Margaret had always loved their neighborhood walks, and sometimes he felt closer to her when he retraced their old routes. The autumn air was crisp, and leaves crunched under his feet as he made his way down Maple Street. That's when he saw them. A woman sat on the steps of the old blue house at the corner, the one that had been empty for months. She looked to be in her early 30s, thin and tired. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her clothes were wrinkled and worn. But what caught Robert's attention were the 3 small children clustered around her. Triplets. They couldn't have been more than 4 years old. 2 little girls and 1 boy, all with the same big brown eyes and tangled hair. They were sharing what looked like a single piece of bread, passing it between them carefully. The woman watched them eat with a look that Robert recognized. The desperate love of a parent trying to provide for her children when she had nothing left to give. Robert slowed his walk, pretending to check his phone. He couldn't help but notice how thin the children were, how their clothes hung loose on their small frames. The woman kept looking around nervously, as if she was afraid someone might make them leave. Unable to ignore what he was seeing, Robert approached them slowly. He didn't want to scare them, but something deep inside him, maybe Margaret's voice, maybe just basic human decency, told him he couldn't just walk by. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Are you folks okay?" The woman looked up at him with startled eyes. She pulled the children closer to her, protective and wary. "We're fine," she said quickly, "just resting." But Robert could see they weren't fine. The children's cheeks were hollow, their eyes too big for their faces. The woman's hands shook slightly as she smoothed down one little girl's hair. "I'm Robert," he said, crouching down so he wasn't towering over them. "I live just down the street. Have you had breakfast?" The woman hesitated. Robert could see her pride battling with her desperation. "We ate," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. One of the little girls, braver than her siblings, looked up at Robert with curious eyes. "Are you nice?" she asked in a small voice. The question hit Robert like a punch to the chest. Margaret had always said children could sense good people. "I try to be," he answered honestly. "I'm Emma," the woman said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "These are my children, Lily, Rose, and Jake." She pointed to each child. As she said their names, "We're just between places right now." Robert nodded, understanding. Between places. It was a polite way of saying they were homeless. He looked at the empty house behind them and realized they had probably been sleeping there, in an abandoned building with no heat or running water. "Are you hungry?" he asked again, addressing the children this time. "I was just heading to get some groceries. I could use some help carrying bags." The children looked at their mother, hope flickering in their eyes. Emma bit her lip, clearly torn between accepting help and maintaining her dignity. "Please," Robert said softly. "I could really use the company. I live alone, and, well, the store is too quiet by myself." There was something in his voice that made Emma look at him more carefully. She saw the sadness in his eyes, the way his shoulders seemed to carry invisible weight. Maybe she recognized a fellow person who was struggling, just in a different way. "Okay," she said finally. But just for a little while. As they walked to the store together, the children chattering quietly among themselves, Robert felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Purpose. For the first time since Margaret's death, he was thinking about someone other than himself and his grief. He had no idea that this simple act of kindness would change everything. He didn't know that Emma was running from an abusive relationship, that she had taken her children and left with nothing but the clothes on their backs. He didn't know that she was a trained nurse who had given up her career to protect her babies. And he certainly didn't know that this chance meeting would fill the empty spaces in his heart that he thought would never heal again. The grocery shopping trip took much longer than usual, but Robert didn't mind. The triplets were fascinated by everything in the store. They had clearly been living on very little for a while, because their eyes grew wide at the sight of fresh fruit and the bakery section. Emma tried to keep them close and quiet, apologizing every time one of them asked a question or touched something. "It's okay," Robert kept reassuring her. Really, he found himself buying much more than he had planned. Extra milk, bread, peanut butter, bananas, crackers. Things that children would eat. Emma noticed and started to protest, but Robert waved her concerns away. "I've been eating too many frozen dinners lately," he said. "This is better for me too." When they returned to his house, the children were amazed by the size of it. They stood in his living room looking around with wonder. Robert realized that his home, which had felt so empty and too big since Margaret died, suddenly felt more alive with their presence. "Can we sit on the couch?" little Jake asked shyly. "Of course," Robert said. "Make yourselves comfortable." Emma was more hesitant. She perched on the edge of a chair, ready to leave at any moment. But when Robert started making sandwiches and the children began to relax and talk, some of her tension melted away. Over lunch, he learned more about their situation. Emma spoke in careful, measured words, but Robert could read between the lines. She had left her husband after he had become increasingly violent. She had taken the children in the middle of the night with nothing but some clothes and what little money she had saved in secret. "I used to be a nurse," she told him quietly while the children played with some old magazines he had found for them. "But David didn't like me working. Said I should focus on the children." "That must have been hard," Robert said. "Giving up your career." Emma nodded. "I loved nursing. But the children needed me more. And David, he made it difficult." Robert felt anger rise in his chest at the thought of someone hurting this gentle woman and her innocent children. But he kept his voice calm and supportive. As the afternoon wore on, it became clear that Emma and the children had nowhere to go. The shelter was full, and she didn't have enough money for a motel room. Robert watched the children playing peacefully in his living room and made a decision that surprised even him. "Stay here tonight," he said suddenly. Emma looked up at him in shock. "What?" "I have empty bedrooms. The children are tired. You're all welcome to stay." "We can't," Emma said immediately. "You don't even know us. I mean, you're very kind, but we can't just—" "Why not?" Robert asked gently. "I have the space. You need somewhere safe. And honestly," he paused, looking around his quiet house, "I could use the company." Emma stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of ulterior motives. But all she saw was genuine kindness and a deep sadness that she recognized. This was a man who was as lost as she was, just in a different way. "Just for tonight," she said finally. But one night turned into a week. Emma helped around the house, cooking meals that Robert actually wanted to eat. She was careful not to overstep, always asking before doing anything, but her presence brought a warmth to the house that had been missing for months. The children slowly came out of their shells. Lily was the artist, always drawing pictures that she would shyly present to Robert. Rose was the talker, full of questions about everything she saw. Jake was the gentle one, often climbing onto Robert's lap when he was reading or watching television. Robert found himself laughing again. The children's innocent joy was infectious. When Jake tried to help him fix a leaky faucet, or when the twins argued over who could set the table, Robert felt a lightness he had forgotten existed. But it wasn't all easy. The children had nightmares sometimes, crying out in their sleep. Emma would sit with them, singing soft lullabies until they calmed down. Robert could hear her through the walls, her voice breaking with exhaustion and worry. Emma struggled too. She was proud and independent, and accepting help went against everything she had learned to do to survive. She insisted on contributing however she could, taking over the cooking and cleaning despite Robert's protests. "You don't have to earn your place here," he told her one evening as she folded his laundry. "You're not my housekeeper." "I need to do something," she replied. "I can't just take and take without giving anything back." Robert understood. Margaret had been the same way, always needing to contribute, to feel useful. It was one of the things he had loved most about his wife. As the days passed, neighbors began to notice the changes. Mrs. Patterson from next door commented on how much happier Robert seemed. His sister Janet called and was amazed to hear children's voices in the background. "Who are they?" Janet asked during one of their phone calls. "Friends," Robert said simply. "They needed a place to stay." "Robert," Janet said carefully, "are you sure you know what you're doing? I mean, after Margaret. Maybe you're not thinking clearly." But Robert had never felt more clear about anything in his life. For the first time since Margaret's death, he woke up with purpose. He had people who needed him, and somehow, they were healing something broken inside him too. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary. But as Christmas approached, none of them wanted to talk about Emma and the children leaving. They had become a family of sorts. Unconventional but real. Robert found himself buying extra Christmas decorations, planning meals for 5 instead of 1. Emma began to smile more often. The constant worry lines around her eyes started to fade. She was still cautious, still protective of her children, but she was beginning to trust that they were truly safe. The children thrived. They gained weight, their cheeks filling out, and their eyes becoming bright and curious again. They started calling Robert Uncle Robert, which made his heart swell every time he heard it. But Emma still carried the weight of uncertainty. She knew this couldn't last forever. Robert was being incredibly generous, but she and her children weren't his responsibility. She needed to find work, to rebuild their lives, to become independent again. The question was how, and whether she was strong enough to start over once more. Spring arrived with a burst of color that seemed to mirror the changes happening inside Robert's home. The cherry tree in his backyard, which he had barely noticed since Margaret's death, was blooming magnificently. The children spent hours playing under it, their laughter filling the air that had been silent for too long. Emma had been living with Robert and helping care for his home for almost 5 months now. She had transformed from the frightened, desperate woman he had met on those steps into someone confident and vibrant. Her nursing skills had proven invaluable in ways Robert had never expected. When he developed a bad case of bronchitis in February, Emma had taken care of him with professional competence and gentle warmth. She knew exactly which medications to give him, monitored his temperature, and made sure he rested properly. "You're really good at this," Robert had said weakly from his bed, watching her adjust his pillows with practiced efficiency. "I told you I was a nurse," Emma replied with a smile. "I may be out of practice, but some things you never forget." That conversation sparked an idea that would change everything. Robert's company had been looking for someone to run their employee health program. It was a perfect job for a nurse. Monitoring workplace safety, providing basic medical care for minor injuries, and helping employees manage health issues. When Robert mentioned Emma's background to his boss, the response was immediate interest. "Can she start next week?" his supervisor had asked. Emma was terrified at first. "I haven't worked in years," she told Robert, pacing around his kitchen. "What if I've forgotten everything? What if I make a mistake?" "You won't," Robert said firmly. "You took better care of me when I was sick than any doctor ever has. You still remember everything, Emma. You just need to trust yourself." The children were worried too. They had grown so attached to their routine, to feeling safe and secure. The thought of their mother leaving for work scared them. Robert solved that problem by arranging to work from home more often. His company had been encouraging flexible schedules anyway, and after 20 years of loyal service, they were happy to accommodate him. He could take the children to school and pick them up, be there when they needed snacks or help with homework. Emma's first day back at work was emotional for everyone. She stood at the front door in her new professional clothes, looking nervous and excited. The children hugged her legs, making her promise to come home. "We'll be right here when you get back," Robert assured her. "Jake and I are going to practice his reading, and the girls are going to help me make dinner." When Emma returned that evening, she was glowing with happiness. "I remembered everything," she told Robert as they sat on the porch while the children played in the yard. "It felt so good to use my brain again, to help people. I had forgotten how much I loved nursing." Over the following weeks, Emma's confidence grew stronger every day. She was excellent at her job, and Robert's colleagues began commenting on how much the workplace atmosphere had improved since she started. She instituted new safety protocols, organized health fairs, and created a wellness program that employees actually wanted to participate in. But more than that, Emma was transforming Robert's life in ways he had never expected. She encouraged him to take better care of himself. Under her influence, he started eating healthier meals, taking evening walks, and actually using the gym membership he had been paying for, but ignoring. She helped him sort through Margaret's belongings, not to forget his wife, but to honor her memory while making space for new experiences. "Margaret would want you to be happy," Emma told him one evening, as they boxed up some of Margaret's clothes to donate. "From everything you've told me about her, she sounds like someone who would want you to live fully, not just exist." Emma also helped Robert reconnect with parts of himself he had lost in his grief. She discovered his old photography equipment, gathering dust in the basement, and encouraged him to start taking pictures again. Soon, he was documenting the children's daily adventures, capturing Emma's smile as she helped with homework, preserving all the small moments that made their unconventional family special. The children continued to thrive. They were doing well in school, had made friends in the neighborhood, and had grown from 3 scared, hungry little ones into confident, happy kids. They still called Robert Uncle Robert, but their attachment to him was deep and genuine. One evening in late spring, as Robert was tucking Jake into bed, the little boy looked up at him with serious eyes. "Are you going to be our daddy now?" Jake asked. The question caught Robert off guard. "What do you mean, buddy?" "Well, you take care of us like a daddy. And Mommy smiles all the time now. And we live here like a real family." Robert felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Would you like that?" Jake nodded earnestly. "Rose and Lily think so too. We talked about it." Later, Robert found Emma sitting on the back porch, enjoying the cool evening air. He told her about his conversation with Jake. "I hope that's okay," Emma said softly. "I've tried to explain that you're not their father, but they've gotten so attached to you." "Emma," Robert said, taking her hand, "I need to tell you something." She looked at him with concerned eyes. "When Margaret died, I thought my life was over. I was just going through the motions, waiting for time to pass. But you and the children, you've given me a reason to live again. You've made me remember what it feels like to be needed, to be part of a family." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I love those children as if they were my own," Robert continued. "And I love you too, Emma. Not because you take care of me or my house, but because of who you are. You're strong and kind and brilliant. And you've brought light back into my world." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. "I love you too," she whispered finally. "I was so afraid to let myself feel that way. After David, I didn't think I could trust anyone again. But you've shown me that there are still good men in the world." They married the following Christmas, in a small ceremony in Robert's living room. The children were their wedding party, giggling and excited as they helped exchange rings. Janet cried through the entire ceremony, amazed at how much her brother had changed. Mrs. Patterson and several neighbors attended, all of them commenting on how perfect the match was. Emma kept working at the company, eventually being promoted to head of the employee wellness program. She started a support group for other women who had left abusive relationships, using her own experience to help others find strength and resources. Robert continued his photography hobby, eventually selling some of his pictures to local magazines. He captured the beauty in everyday moments. Children playing, families gathering, people helping each other. His grief for Margaret never completely disappeared, but it transformed into something gentler, a warm gratitude for having loved and been loved. The triplets grew up calling Robert Dad, and Emma remained Mommy. But their blended family felt completely natural. They had family game nights, took vacations together, and created traditions that belonged uniquely to them. Years later, when people asked Robert about how he and Emma met, he would smile and say it was the luckiest day of his life. He had thought he was just helping a family in need, but Emma and her children had saved him just as much as he had saved them. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with laughter. The man who had lost his purpose found new meaning in loving and being loved. And a mother who had thought she and her children were beyond help discovered that sometimes the most unexpected kindness comes from the most unexpected places. They had all been broken in different ways, but together they had created something beautiful and whole. Emma had indeed transformed Robert's life, but in the process, she had also transformed her own, proving that healing and happiness can come when you least expect it, from the most unlikely sources.